I hope you are not too tired, but I promise this will be the last speech. Three major reasons persuaded me to share this session. The first one is that I am a client, and that the subject Mr. Thomas will address is the core of our daily concern, not that advertising is wasteful or unnecessary. This view has become moth-eaten and obsolete. The fundamental question remains, however, how much is enough? How high is the sky? Are we overspending or underspending? The second reason is that the marketing function that underlies the advertising activity has been rather neglected in this very important conference and successful conference. May I express the wish to see a larger participation of marketeers, marketing experts in the future. The third reason is that Mr. Thomas is a representative of the new breed of advertiser who will take the reins of the industry over the next couple of decades at least. Mr. Graham Thomas is director at Saatchi Saatchi International, the worldwide management team for the company. As you know, Saatchi Saatchi is the largest agency group in the world, billing in excess of $7 billion. He is based in London and is responsible for Europe and the Middle East, from Norway to Oman. I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Thomas.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anybody out there? That film was made for a British voluntary organization called the Samaritans. In the film, we see a distressed man behind a screen, desperate to talk, fighting to be heard, but with no one to talk to, no one to listen. It's a serious film about a serious subject, but compare his situation to ours as advertisers and agencies. Is your advertising fighting unsuccessfully to get through to someone? Perhaps your advertising has no one to talk to. Do you know what to say? Do you know who to say it to? Have you ever demanded or been asked to give an answer to the question, why do you advertise? The answer is simple. We advertise to sell products, to sell services, to sell ideas or points of view. The theme of this presentation is how to exploit advertising as a sales tool, to answer three questions. Why do we advertise? How much should we spend on advertising? What should we expect from our advertising? In sum, how much advertising is enough advertising? Maybe nothing, or $200, or $200,000, or $20 million. In this presentation, I'll address fundamental questions concerning the value that advertising adds to our businesses. I want clients to walk away from this hall and be vigorous with their agencies, to ask agencies to justify their advertising and spending proposals. And in return, I want agencies to demand the same of clients, to question the client's belief in advertising and whether they are prepared to invest properly behind it. The more we use advertising to sell, the more knowledge we should add to our experience and judgment to eliminate the element of luck. And as our experience grows, the notion that advertising sells is confirmed, as a result of which we spend more and more behind it. Between 1980 and 1988, total worldwide advertising expenditure more than doubled to $186 billion. Across the Arabian Peninsula and Egypt during the same period, expenditure has almost quadrupled to $446 million. It is estimated that by the year 2000, worldwide advertising expenditure will reach $1 trillion. Now, is this all money for nothing? Or is it money for old rope for the agencies such as myself? If advertising spend does reach $1 trillion, it should be because advertisers have proven that the outlay of these vast sums of money will add something to their business. We spend these sums because we want to attract the attention of the consumer. We have something to satisfy his or her demand, and we can add value to our business. Advertising is quite simply the most effective way of selling cost efficiently to consumers. To quote the late Bob Goldstein from Procter & Gamble, when you get down to looking at it, it is a very efficient method of selling. If there was a better or cheaper way, we would not be advertising. But do you agree with him? Advertising is much more than publicity, because we use advertising to stimulate and maintain demand over a period of time. And the measure of your success is the sales response you achieve. Of course, not all advertising generates a sales response. The most famous British example of a campaign which failed is the 1960s collapse of a cigarette brand called Strand, as a direct result of this commercial. Can I see the next commercial, please? Unfortunately, rather than sell the idea that you're never alone with the Strand, all this film achieved was to convince British smokers that the person who smokes Strand has no friends, is lonely, has nowhere to go at night, and is generally an uninspiring character. As a result, the brand died. Now we have to ask ourselves a question. How many of us here in the Middle East are running advertising that is not only contributing to your business, but is actually killing it off? Our aim is to use advertising to generate sales. As one English nobleman once remarked, advertising may be described as the science of arresting human intelligence long enough to get money from it. Now, someone the other day in the hall asked the question, how do you know what is a great advertising idea? Let me illustrate this with a short story. There was once a blind man who used to beg in Central Park in New York. He sat on a park bench surrounded by grass and flower beds, with his hat on the ground, ready to receive any donations from passers-by. He also had a sign which read, "I'm blind." One fine morning, early in spring, a copywriter passed by, probably on his way for an early lunch. He stopped by the blind man, said good morning, and took out his copywriter's pen. He then picked up the blind man's sign and wrote something on it. This done, he wandered off in the direction of his favorite restaurant. Later that afternoon, probably very late, he returned from lunch and passed by the blind man again. He stopped by the blind man and asked, "How was your day?" The blind man replied, "Fantastic. I've never done so well," pointing at the hat full of money. Then the blind man asked the copywriter, "What did you write on my sign?" The copywriter confessed, "I added a few words." And the words were, "It's springtime, and I'm blind." An idea turns a banal statement into a piece of poetry, picking up from what Dr. Debone said yesterday. An idea has got nothing to do with video trickery, computer graphics, dancing girls, or jingles. Advertising is an effective sales tool because of our ability to control it. We can control the content of the message. We can control the timing of the message to ensure that we hit consumers when we wish to exploit or build their demand. And we can control the targeting of the message to ensure that we can communicate to those consumers who are most likely to buy our product. In sum, advertising is the only way you can talk to the mass market of consumers directly at an acceptable cost with the guarantee that he or she will hear exactly what you want to say. Now, at this point, having shown one commercial that didn't sell, I'd like to show you a series of commercials that have. The first film was developed to launch British Airways' new Club World in January of 1988. The worldwide budget for the launch was $25 million, of which $8 million was to support advertising. Can I see the next film, please?
So, 2 years in New York, and then he thinks he can tell us something about things. Well, we won't have it.
It's all right. I fix things. He's traveling overnight on the radar.
Not first class.
Of course not. Company policy.
By the time he gets in, he'll be exhausted. And he won't have time to incorporate those new figures simply in his report. He'll be hungry and tired.
I've arranged for the show to bring 6 a.m., not to the hotel.
I've allowed to the slaughter, gentlemen.
Morning.
New Club World delivers the businessman ready to do business. Pleasant trip.
Yes, thank you.
New Club World from the world's favorite airline.
Now, as a result of this commercial, passenger traffic rose 24% last year, revenue rose 30%, and most importantly for British Airways, their yield rose 7% on a worldwide basis, which is quite a lot of money. Now, Anchor Butter in the UK had experienced declining sales volume as health-conscious consumers switched to a plethora of new low-fat spread substitutes. To revitalize the brand, Anchor produced a new advertising campaign to communicate the product's key strength, a natural, creamy taste. Can I see that film, please? Thank you for that, but it's more than just a nice film. Going back to what I'm talking about in this presentation, we actually knew how successful it was. The film went into test market and results were monitored. Spontaneous awareness of the brand increased 17% to 58%, driving an increase in the number of regular purchasers by over 30% compared to the control region where no advertising was shown. And so consequently, this piece of advertising was put into national market. The UK lager market is highly competitive. So when Castlemaine 4X was launched, the initial challenge was to build a niche share by positioning 4X as an authentic Australian lager for everyday drinking. This film was used to launch the brand. Can I see the next film, please?
Well, it's terrible. What do we do? Give him a cold drink. And the coolest thing
Another interesting film, but again, it's not just interesting because it looks pretty on the screen. Tracking studies indicated, when it was first put into test, that Flying Doctor generated 3 times more awareness than its nearest competitor for a given weight of advertising. In fact, the commercial drove a 5% share in 2 years in what is a highly fragmented market with literally hundreds of brands in the marketplace in the UK. And that's a market which is worth £150 million. So again, we only used that advertisement, well, that advertisement was only used when it was known that it was actually going to build business and achieve its sales objective. So if advertising sells, how much should you spend? Now others may ask, how little can I get away with? Or even, how much should I waste? In 1986, Pepsi-Cola signed a contract with a 27-year-old pop singer for his services to appear in 2 TV commercials and provide creative consultancy on a third. This commercial by BBDO is one of them. The next film, please.
Michael? Mr. Jackson?
It is reported that Michael Jackson received $15 million for his services. The TV production cost a further $2 million. Worldwide TV airtime cost was estimated at $50 million. So that took the total advertising expenditure to $67 million on a worldwide basis. Now all this, as one ad man wrote, to sell a carbonated soft drink that, whatever its merits, millions of customers probably cannot tell from rival colas save for the name on the bottle. But Pepsi-Cola, in fact, is selling the name on the bottle. It's selling an image, what customers think it is, what they associate with it. Furthermore, the worldwide soft drinks market is worth $65 billion, and the sales response to that film aimed to generate that from a worldwide consumer base. The key point here is that advertisers need to spend as much as is necessary to achieve the advertising and sales objective. Ask yourself, are you spending too much? Are you spending too little? How do you know whether you are succeeding? Further, the cost equation for an advertising campaign is not just production and media. It is the production budget, the media budget, and the advertising effectiveness research budget, as we saw from the results which I put up on the screen in the earlier commercials. If you don't spend money on assessing the strengths and weaknesses of your advertising strategy and executions, you will not benefit by knowing how to build on what you've got right. You'll throw good money after bad by continuing to spend behind what you've got wrong. So how do advertisers set budgets? Well, traditional formulae for determining advertising budgets vary from the simple, I can afford $500,000 or whatever, to the complexities of econometric modeling. Even today, many marketeers often feel that setting advertising budgets is one of the most arbitrary decisions they must make. But it is not arbitrary if we understand what we are aiming to achieve and understand how to use the tools of the trade. So how much is enough? Well, the answer is to build up from a zero base and forget about the complex formulas which I've just put on the screen and the rules of thumb which you often hear about. Firstly, you have to define your sales and advertising task, and then spend enough to ensure that you can properly fulfill the following. Firstly, that your consumer receives the message. Secondly, that your message is received sufficiently frequently to generate a sales response. And thirdly, that that sales response is sufficiently frequent to build your business and to build your business so that you can market profitably. I want to expand on those principles. Defining your sales objective. This is the most fundamental first step in determining the advertising budget. Notwithstanding this, how often have you spent money behind a campaign with only a vague notion of what you are aiming to achieve? The advertiser must identify what sales response he aims to create. Advertising is part of the cost of selling. So fundamentally, you need to ask, how much am I prepared to spend on selling my product? And of that, what percentage should I devote to advertising? Now, you can look at one of the roughest rule of thumbs, which I've just knocked down, and you can see that advertising expenditure averages out at around 8 to 10% of sales. However, the variation is enormous, so it doesn't really tell you very much. From around less than 1% for oil companies to over 15% for cosmetic and pharmaceutical marketeers. What follows are some of the principles that automatically you should practice. Setting the sales objective forms a context and benchmark for establishing an advertising budget. Objectives may be many and varied, but until you define what it is you have to do, you cannot develop a strategy to execute it or a means of measuring its success. How many among us today have commenced an advertising campaign without really defining exactly what we aim to achieve? This must be your starting point in future. You then have to determine how your consumers receive the message. How many of you really know whether your message is received by the right consumer? Having set your sales objective, you must define your target audience. So how would you select the media most appropriate to reach your target group? Look at the competition, judgment, guess, ask media contractors, ask your agency, or indeed ask Chris Polly, who was speaking yesterday. The first step is to appraise the media choice. Which media? Having built a profile of your key target group, then understand their media habits. Do they watch TV? Do they listen to radio? Do they commute and see posters? Do they read magazines or newspapers? You need to be able to predict their media habits in order to select your media mix. The advertiser's first task is to build reach, to get the message to the right people. Consider a hypothetical car manufacturer, Toyota, in Saudi Arabia. They have the objective of launching a new model range. How does the company identify the media with which to reach their target audience? Where would you start? Firstly, we must appraise media availability, balanced against their effectiveness in reaching adult males in this instance. Using research data on media habits, we can develop an understanding of how to build coverage. Consider TV. One 30-second spot on Saudi television, peak time, will cost you $3,199 and reach about 61.7% of all adult males. But how do we use these figures? Do we believe that because 61.7% of your audience will view during peak hours, that 61.7% will see your message? Saudi is a media seller's market, and peak breaks are often over 40 commercials long. Do consumers watch 30 minutes of commercials? How many of these messages can they remember? How can you guarantee your impact? There's only two guidelines for sure, unless you try and find answers to these questions. Firstly, you won't know anything unless you do ask that question. Secondly, if you don't challenge readily available data with down-to-earth common sense, you'll never improve the depth of your knowledge. The answer may be to reposition your spots within the break to avoid the central bulk. The answer is more likely to be to have stronger creative treatments, to stand head and shoulders above the crowd. But the answer is not to lie back and assume your advertising budgets are working for you. They may not be. Given these constraints, the reach data does provide a useful guide, but it should not be accepted unchallenged. So how can we use the data as a tool to help us cost efficiently build coverage? Must we buy more of the same medium to build reach? Let us consider the relative gain in coverage achieved by buying additional peak time spots on Saudi television. As this chart shows, the marginal coverage gain is small and the cost is high. The first 61.7% of adult males costs $3,199. The next 10% costs over $22,000. So rather than build reach against one medium, it is probably more cost efficient to select alternative media alongside TV. The limiting factor facing the advertiser now becomes media availability. Now, I'd like to compare the impact on reach of combining the three principal Saudi Arabian mediums, TV, video, and press. Consider combining one spot on TV with one spot on an Egyptian feature film for video release. On their own, they achieve a 61.7 and a 26.6% reach, respectively. But when combined, we can see a degree of duplication, as total reach only rises to 69.1, and the average OTS increases to 1.3. Again, stop and think. How can you guarantee that the consumer with the video will receive your message? How long does it take the film to achieve its peak circulation? 1 week, 2, 3, 4, 10? Stop and appraise. Don't take your advertising effectiveness for granted. But before passing judgment, I'd like to compare TV and video against TV, video, and the press medium. If we add two press titles, a newspaper and a magazine, we see that reach can build to 76% with a relatively high levels of duplication, as average OTS rises to 1.9 at a cost of $12,280. In other words, to achieve an additional 14.3% reach over TV, we need to increase the budget by nearly 400%. So what happens if we take TV out of the equation? Well, a clear loss of coverage. For the cost of almost 3 TV spots, we cover only half the audience. This route is therefore not an option, leaving only one other alternative, TV and press alone. As we can see, TV plus press combines to cover 71.8%, with an average OTS of 1.6, costing $10,530. If we compare all 4 mixed schedules, we can see that a mixed TV and video campaign, though, achieves a similar reach to TV and press and at a lower budget. However, this is where we have to consider the nature of the campaign. Now, this presentation is not about creative solutions. However, in order for Nitsuota to increase the sales hook for the launch campaign, we would probably aim to use press as a tactical support medium to work in synergy with the TV. We would therefore plan to have dealer lists and sales incentives in the press. Clearly, we would not be able to place dealer lists and incentives so effectively on video, and therefore, whilst a cost-efficient reach medium, we do not propose using video in our Nitsuota campaign for creative reasons. Hence, we choose a TV and press mix, which gives us 70% reach of our audience, and this becomes our basic building block of the media mix and cost. Now we have to determine how frequently that 70% should receive our message, or in other words, how we build up those blocks. How do you establish the right frequency? Is your advertising hitting the right people half too little or twice too much? The key here is to understand the purchasing patterns of the product and the behavior patterns of the consumer. A product like a detergent with a purchase cycle of, say, 1 week requires higher message frequency than one with a cycle of 3 years, like a car. So we need to understand the purchasing decision itself and the importance of advertising in that decision. For a detergent, the purchasing cycle is fast. Every housewife is buying a pack of detergent every week in Saudi Arabia. Consequently, the detergent advertiser must drip messages to the consumer at an absolute minimum weight of 1 OTS per week per housewife, using copy like this. Can I see the next film, please?
هنصب شوية سائل إيه على جوع نفسك علشان مفهوم البيت حتى قبل الغسيل. أنا كده معمول يا ناس هنبقى الكورة البلاستيك دي لسائل إيه؟ هو الواحد كفاية ما تقوليش حبيبي الكورة دي في غسالة عليك النور. تصوروا يا ناس بتغسل هدوم ابني بسائل أزرق وكورة بلاستيك. بص يا حماتي سائل إيه اللي بيبتدي مفهوم حاجة علشان الكورة بتوزع السائل على طول في قلب الغسيل. وزواج بيننا تخيل في الثاني الياء الكم كله نظيف ومفيش أي أثر للجوع. ممتاز.
سائل الجديد يزيل الأوساخ والبقاء الأعماق الغسيل.
عندك نور.
By contrast, the purchasing cycle of a car is considerably longer, and every car owner is not buying a car every week. So only a small percentage of your potential target, less than 1% in fact, are doing that. Therefore, to advertise constantly would mean that 99% of your effort would be wasted in every week. So the task facing the advertiser is therefore to establish an acceptable level of brand recall at the optimum cost, with copy which sells the model's personality, image, and to a much lesser extent, physical attributes. Hence we see high-impact commercials like this. Next film, please. Hence, we would plan a drip campaign for detergents through 12 months, with an awareness level which steadily builds month on month, and which we will then want to sustain at an optimum level. The car manufacturer, however, could plan 2 or 3 major bursts in the year. But a key factor in the frequency equation is the fallibility of human memory. If creative is weak, or the time period between advertising too long, advertising awareness will decay rapidly. So the timing of intermittent bursts of advertising is crucial. The ideal, as this chart shows, is to time the bursts so that each successive campaign springboards off the residual awareness of the previous bursts. So in other words, we have now identified the pattern of how to build up those blocks. Step 3 is to determine how many of these blocks to use, how we determine the budget necessary to effectively and efficiently execute this. One key consideration is the issue of competitive advertising activity. Competitive activity must be appraised in terms of the stage of market development and the marketing objective. For example, if the objective is to maintain market share in a static sector, you would expect budgets to reflect the relative advertising to sales ratios of key brands. Specifically, to defend a 10% market volume share, there is no need to match the spending of the brand leader with a 50% share. Conversely, if the objective is to become brand leader by trebling market share in a competitive market, sales momentum can only be achieved by dramatically increasing advertising weights against their previous level and outvoicing the competition with a high repetition of the advertising message. The important point throughout this analysis is that we have built up from a zero base. We have built up against objectives and tasks rather than using formula or rather than using nothing at all. If the budget necessary to achieve that objective is greater than the advertiser is able to finance, the issue is not how to compromise by reducing costs. The issue is to review that objective to establish a task which is achievable within the advertiser's financial resource. Fourthly, you have to see that the sales response is sufficiently frequent to build your business. How much sales response should you expect? How quickly should you expect it? Now, awareness is the first step in the consumer's process leading to the purchase of your proposition. Awareness is followed by interest in your product, then desire, and then hopefully action. But awareness on its own is generally an incomplete sales tool. But for example, on the 22nd of January 1984, at a media cost of over $750,000, the new Apple Macintosh computer range was announced to 64 million adults across America with just one spot during the Super Bowl final with this film. Can I see the next film, please?
say why 1984 won't be like 1984.
The company and their agency did not expect consumers to dash out of their armchairs and buy new computers as a result of that film the next morning. They did, however, expect the film and all the PR activity which surrounded it to build an awareness of and interest in this new range, sufficient to provoke a desire to find out more about the computers and to provide a sound bedrock on which to build subsequent sales offences and the millions of dollars which were spent against that. And I'm sure we will all know that Apple computers are now extremely successful. Conversely, some campaigns are designed to yield a near immediate and unsustainable sales response. Let's see the next film, please. Now, this commercial has only one objective, to shift a huge amount of stock over a short amount of time. And the company, of course, will know whether that has been effective by the sales take which they can see every day following that film. So whatever the sales response is generated, it must be sufficient to add value to your business, to get a return on your advertising investment. This presentation has been about increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of achieving that added value and about trying to eliminate the uncertainties. We can achieve this by improving the depths of our knowledge to generate an evolution of ever greater understanding of what is right about our advertising and what is wrong. This too impacts upon the advertising budget, for it is the cost of researching our advertising effectiveness. How do you know when your advertising has been successful? Do you know whether you could have achieved more with the same budget or achieved the same with a lower budget? How do you know what you've got right and what you've got wrong? Researching plans and testing alternatives is often considered by the unsophisticated advertiser as conservative and lacking the entrepreneurial spirit. But this is a myth. What is more aggressive and offensive than determining what is an impeccable plan, then going on to identify not only its inherent strengths, but also its inherent weaknesses, and then being prepared to stand up and say, we got this bit wrong, but we'll get it right next time. The only thing that you can predict with 100% accuracy about an advertising campaign is that there will be at least one element that can be executed better. Finding those weak links will provide learnings about how to improve the use of your media money and how to improve the effectiveness of generating a sales response. It is this learning process that makes brands and your business grow stronger. So what do you measure? Well, in the first instance, you can measure the sales response achieved in previous campaigns against the objectives you set. Did the advertising do what it was intended to do? If yes, what were the key dynamics of the execution which generated that success? If no, what went wrong? I would urge all of you to use the skills and resource of the Middle East advertising research agencies to better understand the strengths and weaknesses of your creative and media executions. In terms of media, I would urge you to make use of the computer-simulated media plans which are now readily available for many Middle East countries. It is in the interest of advertisers to demand a greater depth of understanding of the media market and media habits. Media research companies should acknowledge this and strive to achieve an ongoing greater depth of analysis to provide the advertisers. Further, agencies and research companies must work together to ensure that this data is used effectively. Finally, I started with a commercial, and in a minute I will end on one. But to summarize the presentation, I would like to reiterate the key points. Firstly, seek to improve your understanding of how to use advertising as a sales tool. Secondly, seek to focus your understanding of what sales response you expect your advertising to achieve. Thirdly, seek to improve your understanding of how to establish an efficient and cost-effective advertising budget. Fourthly, seek to understand better the strengths and weaknesses of your advertising in order to build on what you've got right and eliminate what you've got wrong, and ensure that you don't end up in the same predicament as the girl that we're about to see. The advertising business in the Middle East will change dramatically over the next 5 years. Your challenge, both the advertisers and the agencies, is to survive through greater understanding. Can I see the last film, please? Thank you very much. Just before we have, I don't know whether we'll have time for questions, I would like to, on behalf of the speakers, say a few words of thanks, as I am the last speaker today. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organising body, AAPIC, and of course Tariq Nur, for organising and inviting us to such a friendly, stimulating conference in what is obviously such a beautiful and lovely city. Secondly, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Al Sayed for chairing the conference and speaking with such good humour and charm. Thirdly, I'd like to say thank you to all the delegates here who have both listened attentively and discussed fervently both inside and outside of this hall. Finally, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the personnel who have worked so hard at running this conference. This they have done with a smile, a charming greeting, great patience, and with outstanding efficiency. So as a token of our appreciation, I hope that Mai Ali is in the conference. So if she'd like to come forward, if we could put the lights up, I'd like to give her just a little gift showing our appreciation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Thomas, for this excellent presentation. And I think you have spoken for all of us to thank the organizing committee, Mr. Tariq Nur, and the others for this very successful conference. Thank you very much. And now the time is for questions and comments. Are there any questions? Please identify yourself.
Thank you for the speech, Mr. Thomas. Rafiq Basil, Public Graphics, Egypt. Knowing your target market would definitely help you in choosing the ideal media for your advertising. What sources in Egypt would you use to define your target market and thus allocate your advertising budget effectively? And how can you monitor results?
Well, in terms of defining your target market, quite clearly you have to understand the nature of your product and who you hope to sell it through. Now, that may be fairly simple in terms of saying, I have a car, I believe that most cars are bought by males, and so therefore my target market is males. Sometimes it's much more complex than that, but therefore, having defined it, you then have to understand through the research which is available, and there is park research which is available in Egypt, albeit that it's not at such a sophisticated level as one would have liked, but it's using that research and then trying to define the media which you have to go through. The point is, though, that if that research isn't giving you the right answers, then what you should do as an agency, as an advertiser, as is what is happening at the moment with the Zhigny Committee, you have to conduct the research, institute the research, which is actually going to give you the answers. You cannot use an excuse and say, we cannot answer the questions because we don't have the tools of the trade available. If you haven't got the tools of the trade available, you actually have to go out and get them and make them.
Thank you. Another question, please. The advertising business, according to your speech, will see a dramatic change over the next 5 years. Does this include monitoring? And what will be done to improve monitoring?
Yes, it should. It will change over the next 5 years, because I think that what we're seeing now is the Middle East market maturing in terms of its sophistication, because it is becoming one of the few markets left to many advertisers as a means of generating incremental profit. Now, in terms of monitoring effectiveness, then quite clearly, again, the tools of the trade, the techniques are at hand. What you need to do is to be able to find the people who are able to put those techniques into place. So if you want to do, for example, tracking studies amongst your target group, it is more than possible to go out there, even in Cairo, and undertake a tracking study to determine whether the advertising is at least reaching your consumer and that they are remembering it. Sales techniques as well are there readily and available. I mean, we heard the gentleman from Citizen Watches yesterday explain that in his situation in the Gulf, albeit that he has great difficulty, they actually have a sales force which go out every day, every week, every month, going around to the distributors, finding out how many watches have been sold, not only of Citizen watches, but of the competition. Everything is there. What we're talking about is things which are fairly simple and basic. Yes, it is difficult in the Middle East to undertake a lot of these tasks, but it's not difficulty which cannot be overcome. It is actually applying the success that has been achieved elsewhere and saying, how can we do it in Egypt or elsewhere?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.